I'd like to welcome everyone to the Vasculitis Foundation's webinar today. I'm Kathy Olevsky, the host for the Vasculitis Foundation Educational Webinar Series, and I'm also a patient living with MPA vasculitis. And today's webinar is great. It is Successful Shared Decision Making, which is a partnership between patient and provider. And we're so fortunate to have two guests with us today, Dr. Carol Langford and Dr. Jen Gordon. Let me begin by introducing our two guests today. First of all, we have Dr. Carol Langford. She's a rheumatologist and the director of the Center for Vasculitis Care and Research at the Cleveland Clinic. She's been a vasculitis care provider and investigator for the past 30 years. Welcome, Dr. Langford. I'm so happy you have time to share with us today. And I would also like to ask you if you have any disclosures for us today.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, and welcome everyone and spending some time this afternoon with us. I've been an investigator for a number of studies for medications and vasculitis, although that's not really relevant to today's discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And also I'd like to introduce Jennifer Gordon, who is a patient living with I always say this wrong, EGPA, eosinophilic granulomatosis with polyangiitis, which is a form of ANCA-associated vasculitis. She currently serves as the co-lead patient partner in the EGPA registry and hosts the EGPA Cafe Zoom chat through the Vasculitis Foundation. She holds a PhD in pathology and spent the last 30 years working as an NIH-funded biomedical researcher studying neurological disorders and infectious diseases. And you can find her blog online at vasculitides.com or follow her on Twitter at vasculitides. And welcome, Jen Gordon. I'd like to now ask you if you would mind sharing any disclosures you might have.
Hi, Kathy. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here today. I have nothing to disclose.
Thank you. And I'm excited to say now that we will get started. And to start us off today, we are actually going to start with one survey. So if you all give me just a second, I can bring that up. This always takes a second. Let's see, there we are. Now, if you see your screen, you should see a question about how would you describe your relationship with your care provider? And think of the provider that you deal with the most for your vasculitis when answering this question. Okay, just a few more seconds to give everybody a chance to figure out the poll situation and how to answer it. We're at about, all right, and I'm going to end the poll and share the results so that Dr. Langford and Jen can discuss this with you. Can you see those results?
Yes.
Yes, I can see them. So I noticed right away that I'm really glad to see nobody pick number 5. I don't think my provider listens to me. So I think that's a really good sign. Dr. Langford, any comments?
Yeah, now similarly, I'm glad to see that most of the selections were in choice 1 or choice 2 as far as where you feel like you're able to talk to your provider. And again, while you are covering things that are fairly narrow as far as labs and medication, that those are being discussed with you.
Okay, well, thank you so much for participating in our poll, everybody. And I would love to let Dr. Langford and Jen get started with our presentation today so we can learn more.
So our topic is shared decision-making in medicine. Dr. Langford, can you tell us a little bit about what shared decision-making is?
Yeah, I mean, shared decision-making is really when a decision is made together with the clinician and the individual. Really, when you think about it,
I smell garlic bread.
There are decisions that are being made really almost at every visit. Now, sometimes those are big decisions, and sometimes they may not be quite as obvious. But those are times as far as where there are important interactions that are going on between the clinician and the individual in trying to understand and make decisions together. So there are some things that really play a key role. If we could go back, please. in shared decision making. There we go. So anytime we're really approaching something, the first thing I want to always make sure is that, particularly again, when we're talking about a medication decision, is that we start first with what's known from the published studies about how effective is that medication and what are the risks. But that by no means is the only important aspect. It's very key as far as to try and understand from the individual about how some of those things may be affected by what their preferences is and what's important to them. We also want to understand as far as what the goals of that decision are going to be and what might be some of the outcomes, both some of the positive things and what could be some of the more concerning things. And also to allow time as far as where we can openly discuss any questions and concerns, and those can be on both sides.
Thank you. Can we go through a little bit more detail? For example, why shared decision-making is important from both the patient and the provider's perspective?
Well, again, I think although the clinician can, draw up as far as what might be a medical plan or a recommendation, ultimately it's the individual who is making the decision is going to be the person that's being impacted by it. One of the things that is, I think, very common to human nature is that when we as individuals become engaged, is when we participate in decision making. And that can be seen in our everyday lives, but it also applies to when we're making shared decisions in healthcare. Now, there are other factors that can influence the importance of why it is so critical to make these decisions together. The reality is that every decision we make is going to have its upsides and its potential downsides. And we need to understand those and how the person might perceive that. There's also times where, again, the great news in vasculitis is that there may be now more than one reasonable option. And it's important to be able to discuss what those are and, again, how they may balance against each other, particularly for that individual. Similarly, there may be times where there is no one option that has a clear advantage, and we need to be able to discuss why that is and what that means for the person. And the other thing is recognizing that what may be the benefits and also the harms may differ in an individual setting based upon numerous different factors as far as the age of the individual, their other health problems, and even other things as far as what they do for work and what they do with their family as far as thinking about how could that decision affect them as individuals.
Thank you for mentioning that. It's really great that we have more options, but as you said, with more options can sometimes come more questions and more confusion for patients. I'd like to go to patient preference. Can we talk a little bit more about that you mentioned a minute ago?
Yeah, patient preference is very important to understand because, each individual is going to have their own individual goals and also their concerns. And what may not be important to one individual may be extremely important to another. And similarly, what may seem like a small matter to one is actually very important to another. So we can talk about a couple of different examples. So if we talk about maybe a medication that needs to be administered by a needle. So for some people, that may not be a concern at all, while for others, that's a very big deal, and it may influence their willingness to be able to take a treatment. And the only treatment that's useful is a treatment that they're receiving. So it's very important that we understand that if needles are a concern, that we can factor that into the decision. Another example would be something like blood and urine tests. So these are very important in vasculitis, both to monitor the underlying illness and also the safety of medications. And while, again, to someone that may be a very small thing as they schedule their time in the lab and go to get these samples drawn. But for other people who are working and may have certain restrictions, there are certain people actually have to take a vacation day off to be able to get their labs done. That's time away from their personal reflection and time with their family. So understanding these things as far as is very important, and recognizing again what may be seem like a small issue to one person may be very important to another.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's really, really interesting to hear your perspective on that and that you're thinking about all those things. As a patient, that reminds me that whatever the reason, whether it may seem small to me or big to me, I probably need to be communicating that to my provider. Otherwise, how will they know?
Yeah, that's very true. We need to try and understand that so that we can try and factor that into, again, the shared decision.
So let's move on and talk about the office visit, which I think is the crux of the relationship between doctor and patient. And we wanted to talk a little bit about what actually goes on in the office visit and make sure that everybody understands there are really important decisions being made every time you're in the office. And I'd like to get your perspective of what's going on in your mind when you're walking through a typical office visit with one of your patients.
Yeah, so, it was interesting in the poll as far as that, about half of you had said as far as that the visit focused on things as far as medications and labs. And again, I can understand that. When we see someone in an office visit, and when I see someone, there's really a few key things I want to come away from is I want to get a sense as far as where do I think their vasculitis is? Do I get any hints as far as from their symptoms or signs that there may be some active inflammation going on? How are they doing with their medication? Is there any evidence to suggest that they're having side effects from it that suggest a change? And I also like to understand a little bit about, how things are going otherwise. Again, things such as what's going on with their family, things going on as far as work is important to have some understanding of, because again, there are certain jobs that may not be in their best safety interests. So even things, again, that may seem that they don't always fit in the medical visit, do have some importance as factoring in, I know it, what we want to come away from at the end of the day, as far as thinking about where are they at in terms of the underlying illness and their safety overall.
Can you talk a little bit about continuity of care and why it's important to have follow-up appointments?
Yeah, the follow-up appointments, again, really serve multiple different opportunities, to be able to see what's going on. Now, certainly foremost, as far as, again, with an in-person visit, for almost all forms of vasculitis, there's certain features that we may only get information on by actually talking to you and doing an examination. As far as, again, for certain organ systems, just talking to someone on the phone or getting their labs is not going to really be able to tell us the whole story. So it's important from that perspective. And again, just sort of touching base about how things are going is critical. And again, all of us did what we could during the COVID pandemic, and certainly virtual appointments played a very critical role. But being able to actually have follow-up in person at times, and again, maintaining that continuity with regular visits, allows us to really understand how people are doing and where they are as far as in their treatment journey.
Thank you for that. Do you have any suggestions for patients about how to approach their office visits? Any top tips for them?
I think the things to keep in mind is, again, this is the opportunity where your doctor is trying to understand, how you are doing, but also your opportunity to voice any concerns or questions that you have to your clinician. So again, these can pop up from different time to time. And so, it's helpful sometimes maybe to keep a list as far as, are there things you want to make sure that you get covered in your office visit? Are there other things that you want to make sure they know? Again, things that are important as far as refills, labs, those are easy to kind of forget in the course of a busy visit. So again, coming in as far as with some notes, even if brief, as far as about what you want to make sure gets covered in a visit and what you want the clinician to know can be very valuable.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. I do that the night before any visit. And I also try to spend a little time thinking about like, well, how am I actually doing? Right? Sometimes you need to take stock of that and be able to figure out, what's my 2 or 3 minute summary right out of the gate that I'm going to be able to tell my doctor that summarizes how I'm doing. So we can spend the time focused on the most important things.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Here's an example I wanted to walk through with you. I know sometimes we patients get perplexed and we think there might be a simple answer to something, or we wonder, why can't, I'm so confused, why can't the doctor just tell me what to do? So here's an example for you. Someone goes to see their ENT with a sinus infection, and they ask the patient, well, what antibiotic should they prescribe? They're the doctor. Shouldn't they know better than me? What do you respond to that?
Yeah. I mean, that's actually a great example because I first actually got alerted to this as far as through a very similar scenario, as far as when I first started taking care of people that had sinus issues. So yes, it's true. When we encounter a sinus infection, we know that the usual organisms that cause sinus infections and what some of the best antibiotics for those are. But on one of my conversations with someone, I said, well, I would recommend this antibiotic. And they said, oh, the doctors always tell me this, but it never works for me. What always works is this other antibiotic. So that was a perspective that from someone who had had frequent sinus infections was very valuable to have. So, I think how I try to approach it now, as far as is in scenarios like that, I may say, as far as, well, this would be a good choice, but is there something that's worked particularly well for you? So it's, again, important to understand as far as if there are perspectives the individual has had, as far as with that, where that may fit into thinking about what might be the best choice for them.
Maybe this is a good sign that your doctor's listening to you and listening to you, asking for your input. What about easy decisions when it seems like there's an obvious choice of one option over another? Are there easy decisions with vasculitis?
I don't know that there are easy decisions. There are decisions where we can be guided by what the studies have shown us. And again, we will be the first to point those out. But that doesn't mean that they're easy or sometimes that they're necessarily the best. And that's why, again, we need to sort of understand for that person how that may factor into everything. So again, I think there are sometimes decisions and recommendations that are very strongly based. And again, that's part of what we're trying to communicate as far as is the reasoning and rationale behind why we might make that as a choice. But again, I still wouldn't consider that as being easy.
Simple, but not easy.
Yeah.
So how about this one? What if I just want my provider to tell me what to do? Maybe I'm newly diagnosed and overwhelmed and I just want to know what I'm supposed to do next. Or maybe I have been working with my provider for years and I trust them and I really want to hear their opinion. What do you feel about that?
Yeah, and again, I think the clinician should be providing their opinion. But again, I think it's important to have some dual interaction as far as with that, even if it's just a small one, as far as voicing, what is your question? Where's a question you might have or a concern you might have, as far as, again, the clinician will make a medical recommendation, but it's very important we get, something, even if it's just a small feedback as far as where you are, as far as in some of the thoughts that you have. And that can be very helpful.
Thank you. Okay, so next we're going to have another poll question. Kathy, can you help us with this one?
I will do that. We should be seeing the second poll now, and think about how you're communicating with your provider. How honest are you with the provider in the office visit? Hopefully everyone can see the poll. Oh, yes, I see a few answers starting to come in. Well, we're at about 60% of you have had a chance to enter your answers, so we're just going to give everybody a little bit longer. Very good. I think I'm going to share the results with you now, Dr. Langford and Jen, to see if you have any thoughts on the results.
Yeah, so this one, from the patient perspective, you walk in there and the doc says, "How you doing?" And you just say, "Oh, I'm okay." But are you really okay? And are you telling your doctor when you're not okay? And I see some people, I'm okay, but I'm not really okay, might be holding out. It looks like most of us, though, are sharing how we're doing. Hopefully the ones that said, "I'm okay," really are doing okay, and that's good. I see about 25% of us are really not doing okay. So that's the vasculitis, but you need to communicate that with your doctor. Otherwise, they can't really help you, right? Dr. Langford, any comments here?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I certainly I wish the 10% was smaller, but I'm glad it's not higher. And again, those at both ends where you're saying you are okay or you're not okay. And again, I think we also recognize when we're in the visits, as far as that, it's very common that people will sort of start the discussion and say, "Oh, I'm doing okay." And that's where, again, we'll start to get into more things and it becomes clearer that there's not. So, again, I think that's not uncommon in a visit.
So let's talk a little bit about communicating with your doctor. Dr. Langford, tell us why the honesty is so important.
Yeah, we need to understand, how is it that you're feeling? And it's not always easy to discuss as far as, when we're not feeling well or something's concerning us or something may be, personal or embarrassing. Again, this is all in human nature. But we need to understand those things, again, even if it's something like, so, you have a concern about a medication and you're not taking it. And we really need to know that because, again, we want to understand what the concerns are. And there may be other choices that could be considered, or there may be a concern that we can address readily as far as being able to address it. But we won't know that as far as unless that's being communicated to us. So even though some of those discussions are difficult, that we need to have them, and it's very important in your care.
What about confusion? There's a lot going on in the office visit. You heard something or you're not sure about something. What do you do if you don't understand what your doctor's asking you to do?
Please ask about it. And there can be a variety of ways to do that. You can try and express back to the doctor as far as, so this is what I heard you just say, but I'm not understanding this point. Could you please go over that again or express it in a different way? Certainly, again, if you need more time about things, there are ways as far as that can be followed up on as far as in further discussions. But if there's something, again, that you're concerned about, you don't understand, just come out and just ask about it. And again, if you're not quite sure, it can be very general as far as, and they can break that down as far as more specifically.
So if you're the patient, and I say this to my fellow patients, don't just nod and say, "Yeah, yeah, yeah," and you're not following what's going on. Sometimes it's just overwhelming. And I think it's okay to just say that and say, "You know what, this is so much information. I'm really not sure what I'm supposed to do next. Can we break it down?" So then if we get to something like uncertainty, let's say that you might have a side effect, or you might have a problem, or you might think you're having a flare, and you need to communicate with your provider, but you're not sure about what to do or when to contact them. Any advice about that?
I mean, I would always say err on the side of just contacting. because it's not always clear as far as something that you might not have thought twice about before a diagnosis of vasculitis is very important to now, as far as, again, certainly that comes into play when we're talking about infections, things that just might have seemed like, sniffles or a cold or, a fever. It can be a very big deal now. So I would err on the side as far as letting your doctor know. And again, if there's uncertainties about what you are not clear on, you're unsure what to do, as much specifics as you can provide as far as, I'm not sure about this medication because of this, or I'm not sure about this test because I'm concerned about this. And sometimes you might not be able to be as specific, but if there's something you can narrow it more down to as far as what you're not unsure about, that's makes it, we can hone in on that more and make sure that we've got that covered.
That's great advice. Let's take this a bit further and let's talk about how communication is really a two-way street. Is your provider listening to you? How do you know the doctor is listening to you?
Yeah, I think you can often tell as far as, again, based upon where the next discussion goes. And again, if you're not clear, it's all right to come back and say, I am very concerned about this. How do you feel about that? Or something that where you're feeling you're getting that concern directly addressed.
And what about listening to your provider? If the patient's not listening to the doctor, or you don't feel like the patient's hearing you, what advice do you have there?
Yeah, I think that, again, sometimes if I'm not clear on something, I'll ask them as far as, to tell me a little bit about some of the things we discussed. And again, that can be done in a very general and a way such that, again, we're actually doing more information conveying as far as with that. And I just want to always kind of make sure that information is being conveyed. Now, there are times as far as where that can be difficult, as far as there's a lot of information, like you said, going on. So again, particularly important points, I'll try and make sure that I give something in writing for the person to be able to take home, as far as so they can review that again and make sure that information has been clearly conveyed. Because again, there may be medical reasons why it's difficult for a person to take in a lot of information.
Yeah, so here's another example. What if you feel like your doctor is pushing you to do something, a certain treatment or something, or really kind of rushing you to make a decision? What advice do you have for a patient who might be hesitating in that situation?
So there are some times where an urgent decision needs to be made. Now, again, I would imagine that the clinician would be able to say that, as far as saying, I'm concerned about what's going on with your vasculitis right now. And I think we do need to make some difficult decisions, even though these are a bit more urgent. But sometimes that doesn't always come through clearly. So the one thing you want to always make sure, as far as, is there a reason that a decision has to be made sooner rather than later? So that can be a point as far as making sure that you understand that. If it's not something as far as that, again, is an urgent decision, then again, that's something to express as far as saying, this is something I'm not exactly comfortable with. Can we make another time, as far as in a week, to have a phone call or a virtual visit to be able to discuss this? Or, again, share as far as what the concern is, that you are feeling that way, because that's something we want to know. And again, you want to know, as far as, again, if there's reasons the clinician is having some urgency with it or not.
I think that's a really important point, especially if it's an urgent situation. I can see a newly diagnosed patient or a medication that changed because something's not working, there's an urgent, active vasculitis, that might be one reason that, the doctor is saying, okay, here's the plan, I recommend you do this, this, and this. And then again, if the patient's just saying, okay, but they're not sure about it, that's a missed opportunity to sit there and discuss it face to face. I think as a patient, it's a good idea to practice saying something like, I'm not sure about this, I need more time, get your words together so that you have that in hand so you can halt the moving train in the office visit and say, excuse me, I'm not sure about this, and make sure that your doctor hears that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so let's move on to some difficult conversations. Let's talk about second opinions. Dr. Langford, how do you feel about second opinions?
It's something I'm always supportive of. Certainly, it's something I actively practice as far as, even though, I've been doing vasculitis a while, there are often occasions that are not very clear cut. And, I rely on colleagues, both here at Cleveland Clinic and other vasculitis colleagues across the country, as far as that I will get different thoughts from if I think it's going to be helpful. And I'm very open with people as far if there are other other physicians that I think would be helpful for them to get an opinion from. I don't have any concerns with that. Again, I think any a confident physician, as far as that's looking out for the best interests of the individual they're caring for, should not be threatened by someone who can provide an informed opinion that could help the person.
Thank you so much for saying that. I will then ask you, what do you think if your doctor doesn't want you to get a second opinion? What should you do then?
So, I think there's different ways to approach it. There are some places where, again, that may be, one of the few rheumatologists or nephrologists that's in a community, and that person does not want to lose that interaction and that professional relationship. And, one of the ways that could be approached, as far as saying, thank you for your care. I appreciate everything you've done. I have been trying to learn more about my vasculitis, and you could even say, I've read some things from the Vasculitis Foundation, and one of the things that they mention as far as is that it can be helpful, as far as, because these are rare diseases, to be able to have an appointment with someone who sees this quite a bit, and that could be a resource to me and to you, if possible. So, make it as far as in that way. And again, I would always hope that that would be well received.
Yeah, so I think what you're talking about there is many of us who might not live near a vasculitis center of excellence or be able to go to see a specialist and is working with a local rheumatologist or other doctor, that you could approach it from that direction and say, well, this would be somebody you could work with as part of the team. That's a great point. Here's another difficult one. What if the doctor and the patient disagree about what the treatment approach should be, or another type of decision? How do you handle that?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think there are going to be certain disagreements at times. And, certainly the thing, as far as it's important to understand, as far as, so if the doctor or the clinician disagrees, why is that? Try and understand, as far as, is there a reason that they are recommending a certain medication? that, again, you would really prefer not to take. It maybe there's a side effect that you're concerned about. And again, maybe there's a reasoning the doctor recommended that. Again, ultimately, it is still your decision as far as if you want to proceed down that course, because as I mentioned, you have the ultimate decision with this, and a treatment is only going to work if it's being received. So it's always, that's why this whole concept of shared decision making is important, because the only, effective approach is the one that's actually being carried out. So again, I think it comes to trying to understand, as far as on both sides, why is the clinician making this recommendation? And for the clinician, why does the individual have this concern where they disagree with this approach? And again, often when you sort of understand both of these perspectives, that's where you'll come to a mutual decision that maybe it is with what the clinician feels is best, or maybe there's a different approach that could be used that will address the individual's concerns.
So the doctor and the patient can agree to disagree. They
Yeah.
should have open communication. And this is a process. This is a relationship that goes forward.
Mm-hmm. Very much.
That's great. You want to make any comments about Dr. Google? I'm sure Dr. Google's in your office a lot.
Dr. Google is in my office, yes. So, the internet has been, both a tremendous blessing and also a great source of misinformation. And the reason I say that, as far as, again, for clinicians, we can get the results of new published information immediately. So we don't have to wait for a journal to come to our mailbox or the next conference. So it can be a great source as far as being able to disseminate, the latest innovations and medical knowledge. But there's both old information. So I know that there's things as far as about vasculitis from when the internet first became available that is way out of date. And there's just frank misinformation. So again, if there is something that you read on the internet, rather than just taking it in hand and pursuing it, again, bring that to your doctor and say, look, I read this. What is your take on this? And they can, share with you as far as, oh, yes, that's very good information. This is how we should think about it. Or, no, this is wrong. And this is why, this is not correct piece of information, so that, you're approaching this as far as being able to get valuable information, but also not getting misleading information that could, cause you undue worry or harm.
Yeah, I think that's an important public service announcement. The last point there, the internet is a source of both knowledge and misinformation. Well said. Let's shift a little bit and talk about the role of care partners and other family members. Kathy, we have another poll.
We do. We have a poll that I am going to launch now. And when you're looking at this poll, think about the people that support you in your care partners, families, friends, etc. So hopefully everyone can see that poll now and start answering it. Yes, I see a few answers starting to come in. This will be an interesting one to see the variety of answers. I've heard a lot of different things about this from people, from patients. All right, we're about 65% of you in. We'll just wait a little bit longer and see if we can get a few more answers. Okay, great. I think we're going to share the poll now so that we can get your take on it, Dr. Langford and Jen. Hopefully you'll see the results there.
Yes, I can see them. It looks like it's pretty evenly distributed. Most people have some level of a care support system, and that's great to see. Some may have them more engaged in provider visits and other things than others, but overall, it looks like most people have a care team they can rely on, which is great. Dr. Langford?
Yeah, I agree. I'm glad we're only seeing single digits as far as for people who don't have much of a support. And again, we can see that support systems are something that most of you have as far as in your care team.
Okay, I think we will, with that, I'm going to stop sharing the poll. Hopefully my producer in the background will make that go away if I didn't. I didn't. Jen, if you'd like to continue on, that would be great.
Sure. So let's talk about the role of care partners and family members in shared decision-making. Dr. Langford, tell us a little bit about how you approach this.
Yeah, so again, I think that care providers and family members can have a very important role and a valuable role. But it is important to recognize that this still is all about you as an individual. And like we saw a little bit as far as in the poll questions, there are some people that have a very active support system where they are at visits. There are other people that feel most comfortable as far as having their support system as far as that they know are there. And there are other people that, again, really feel it's very important for them as an individual to play the major role. And there's not necessarily any one right answer. But for, again, people who, feel it and have the support system, we certainly want to try and engage with them to the extent that the individual wants to have them engaged.
What about bringing a care partner or family member to visits?
Again, I think that if that is helpful to you, that's something that we certainly support. It can be helpful as far as having someone where, again, it may be sort of an independent set of ears, particularly when there's a lot of information going on. That can be someone, again, who can be a support system if there's difficult things being discussed. But again, I would emphasize that that's a personal decision. And, ultimately, as far as if that's something that would be valuable to you, that, we support that. But, if you would rather not, and you feel more comfortable having a one-on-one discussion, with your clinician, that's also something that we respect.
What about if family members might disagree with the approach? I'm sure you've seen this from time to time. How do you approach that?
Yes, and again, I think that can happen for a variety of reasons. Like the individual themselves, the family member or the care partner is also trying to understand all of this information. Maybe there's something that they didn't quite follow as far as in this, as far as why they're disagreeing. The other part of it is as far as that, I think our loved ones, have our best interests and our concerns at heart. And there's a natural human response that it's very difficult to think about these things for their loved one. And particularly, again, when they're talking about medications that may have side effects, difficult types of tests, there may be things as far as about their worry for the individual that brings out a concern as far as that's voiced as disagreement. So, I think it's important to try and understand that. Again, when we have visits, the focus is really on the individual because, it is their decision, it is their body. But again, if the family or care partner is coming into some of that, it can be worthwhile with the individual's permission as far as trying to understand where that disagreement is coming from so that we can try and help support the individual as part of that process.
Yes, thank you. And along those lines, how can family members help to support shared decision making? Any advice there?
Yeah, I think, understanding the individual's perspective, and supporting that, and, making sure that, if there are concerns that have been voiced to them, that again, they're comfortable sharing with the doctor, that those questions or concerns have come forward in a supportive way. So, again, I think, that can be very valuable as far as in that setting, as far as again, supporting, the person who's there, that is really needing to make the shared decision with the clinician.
Yes, totally agree. As we begin to wrap up here, I just want to address something that we often as patients think about, that what are the power dynamics between the doctor and the patient? And I know many patients think that providers are the ones in the driver's seat and have the power. If my doctor doesn't like me, if I don't listen to what they want me to do, they won't want to treat me, or I'll have to find somebody else if I disagree. Can you talk about that from the doctor's perspective?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting perspective, and certainly one that I understand, as far as that's something that, we are sensitized to, as far as from an early point in life and from what we're surrounded by with media and all sorts of other things. But the doctor's perspective is actually very different, as far as we really see that you're actually the one that's in the driver's seat. You're the one that has all of the power and the control as far as in making the decisions that will affect you. You're the one that will be deciding, do I take this medication today? Do I go to get the lab done or the test done? And, the only way as far as that we can be, of help and really in supporting you, as far as is in recognizing that you truly have the power in the relationship, and making sure that you do feel empowered as far as in having all of the knowledge and information you need, as far as being able to make a decision and being able to, pursue as far as what that plan is going to be. So that actually is really how we view it from this side.
I'm really glad that we have a chance to talk about that, because I think many patients, especially when you're not feeling well and you're particularly vulnerable, it can be very intimidating, and you often don't feel like you have anything in your own control with vasculitis. So I think I'd like to end here by talking about how we can work together on our healthcare, the patient and the doctor together, and any advice that you have. Hopefully the discussion that we've had today about shared decision making has given people more food for thought. But any final tips about building this team and this relationship?
Yeah, I think it really all comes down to communication. It is very much a two-way street, as far as making sure that you are voicing concerns and questions you have, and also playing an active role as far as in listening, and then also again voicing back as far as things that have been mentioned, as far as that are not clear. We very much as far as want to be able to partner in terms of your healthcare goals, and again, all of the things we talked about in terms of preferences, values, different aspects of your life, all will come into those decisions. And again, understanding those through frank communication is very important.
Thank you. We have a couple of bullets here to summarize, Dr. Langford, what you just said. Communication is key. The patient makes the ultimate choice in their healthcare. Do not be afraid to ask questions that might be difficult or uncomfortable. Good providers want you to do this. Build a trusting relationship with your providers. And the goal is a shared decision between the patient and the doctor. And this is teamwork.
Yeah, it's definitely team.
Yes. So Kathy, I think we'll turn it back over to you for any questions that have come in.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to convey, first of all, how much the people that are listening have put in the chat box about how important it was to them and how it was an excellent presentation. You're both, one said competent, wise, and caring. So just wanted you to know how much you all are appreciated today. And we did have a couple of questions. I did want to say one of the questions was from one of our participants named Amy, and it was a little bit too medically specific, but if we can find a way to rephrase it, I will get that question to you. One of the questions that I'll ask while we're waiting to see if we can rephrase a couple of these is, do you have advice, Dr. Langford, for someone who feels intimidated to ask their doctor questions because they're actually not sure if it's important and if they're taking too much of their time? It is that dynamic that Jen was just discussing about, we think they are all knowing and maybe we are asking petty questions, kind of. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, again, I know it sounds sort of oversimplified, but there really aren't any bad questions, because that's how we really try and understand as far as where some of the areas that maybe we haven't fully communicated as clearly as we should are coming through, or maybe there was a gap as far as something we actually didn't cover. So it is important as far as in voicing those. You should never feel afraid as far as if it's something that maybe you think seems overly simple, or maybe the doctor covered it. There's no problem as far as with asking those, as many times as you need to make sure that you're clear and comfortable on some of these issues.
I think that was really great that you restated that, because I think that it actually answers one of the questions somebody has asked in here is, how do you fire a provider that you've lost faith in? And so if you don't tell them everything that's going on, you may not be getting proper feedback. But let's ask you that question. Do you have any advice on how they move on?
Yeah, I mean, trust is a critical component to, the care relationship, and Jen mentioned that as far as with that. So it is important that you have trust in your provider. Again, it's certainly something you can raise with them. You can always seek out another provider. As far as, again, it's very important to have trust in your provider. So you shouldn't continue in a relationship where you just feel that has been fractured beyond a point as far as where that can be recaptured. And again, this will differ for people in different communities as far as what options may be available. As far as, certainly, it's always important to maintain, an active care path with someone as far as when you have vasculitis. So you want to try and have a plan in place as far as for that. But you want to be in a relationship where you feel there is trust as far as on both sides.
Great advice. Jen, did you have anything? You were nodding your head. I don't know if you felt.
I would just add that sometimes you might feel very emotional about the relationship and you want to tell the doctor, I'm firing you, but okay, is that really necessary? You might need them in the future, or maybe it's at that point in your care, you've had a disagreement, and that's not the end of the relationship. I think one of the things we tried to focus on in this presentation is that you build that trust. And if you don't have that trust, that's okay. You can move on if you're able to find another provider, but you might be able to rebuild it. And maybe there was a reason there wasn't enough open discussion or honesty on one or both sides. So I think sometimes you need to give it a little bit of distance and You focus on your goal, which is to find a provider that is going to listen to you rather than your dissatisfaction with a particular provider.
Great advice, Jen. Dr. Langford, were you going to add to that, or just I can go to the next question?
Yeah, no, I certainly agree.
Great advice. I can say that there is someone that's asking about how do I get my physician to compare abnormal lab tests for the past year. She doesn't feel like it's being taken seriously. And I guess this is a very common question is like, I think one thing looking at my lab tests, and the doctor maybe is not expressing themselves in a way that they are taking your thoughts seriously. And I know I have a very caring doctor, so I get my answers easily, but I have heard from a lot of patients who do not. So do you have some advice on when you feel like you're at that roadblock?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that nowadays, as far as, again, many of you have patient portals or other ways as far as where you can print up labs or you have access to labs. I mean, it's all right to ask about a specific lab value. And if you have something that shows a trend or something and you're concerned about that, because again, there can sometimes be a very rational reason why a lab might be outside of a normal range. So certain medications may actually be expected to do that. And again, it looks like it's outside, but that may be something that we expect and that's not harmful. So, actually providing as far as the specific example with that so they can explain it, can be helpful.
Well, that's great advice. I've heard that also from patients and doctors that we use Dr. Google as Jen framed and you answered, and we think we know the answers, but this honestly is what your physician is for. So if you want to bring the printed out variety of lab results with you, maybe your advice is great that they might know why it wasn't important and we don't know why as not having gone to medical school. So any other comments, Jen, that you want to add based on some of these questions that we've had or anything else?
I just want to thank everybody for sharing with us today. I think this is a really important topic, and I'd like to thank Dr. Langford for participating today and for sharing her thoughts with us.
Well, thank you so much to both of you. It is time to wrap up. We are out of questions and we're also out of time, but before I wrap up, I always like to ask the speakers, did you have any final thoughts of things that you heard today that you would just like to emphasize, or if you felt like we shared it all, we'll move along.
Yeah, I mean, I also want to thank all of you and Jen as far as with being here this afternoon. Again, I think that the fact that you are here and have interest in this, really is demonstrating as far as your recognition of the important role that you play in your healthcare and in your decision making. And, those of us who are caring for you very much see us as part of your team and want to be able to provide you with any information that can help you as far as in this process of having a shared decision.
Well, I do appreciate that. I know how hard it is to get the time from our various providers to sit and talk with us about these things. So we appreciate you giving us your personal time today. I'd like to thank Dr. Langford. I'd like to thank Jen Gordon and also our Vasculitis Foundation for making these webinars possible for all the vasculitis patients, and our two sponsors. But thank you so much for your time, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.